Hello everyone, I've got a Key Stage 5 biology video here on the role of tissues within the lung. Now I have done another video about the lung and general anatomy and ventilation, where I've gone through and labelled the key components, but in this one we're just going to look a little bit closer at the different tissues. Now I've drawn here, it's probably one of my better drawings to be fair, a transverse section, so a cross section of the trachea, or the windpipe as it's commonly referred to as. I was going to draw the bronchiole also, but that was getting a bit too time consuming. So we're just going to really look at this particular diagram that I've got here. We're going to label up this diagram first, and then we're going to talk about what all the components really are. So if we were to look at this transverse section of the trachea, you can see that around the outside there's this almost backward C shape forming from this big outer layer. Now this outer layer is what we call cartilage. So we'll just label that in there, cartilage. You'll notice that there's a darker red structure found just beneath where I've written the word cartilage there, and they are smooth muscle and elastic fibres. So this part here we'll label in as smooth muscle, and then what you find are these here, which are elastic fibres. Now it's much easier to talk about the components and the role of the tissues once we've got this labelled up. So you've got cartilage, smooth muscle, and these elastic fibres. Now you'll notice that there are, within the inside, not overly clear, it's a sort of central kind of, almost forming like a ring, if you like, of cells that have these little hairs on them. And these, I'm going to label these as a separate entity, using a different colour. These here are ciliated epithelial cells. So this is our ciliated, and the cilia being the little hairs that you find within the throat that are waft, that move mucus up to the top of the mouth to be swallowed. So these are ciliated epithelium. And I'm going to put here with what are called goblet cells, because we need the goblet cells to produce the mucus. And those goblet cells are essentially these things that I'll highlight in a sort of lighter blue colour just here. Perhaps not so visible, maybe I'll highlight that in darker blue in fact. So this here, that there is a goblet cell. And it is in fact a mucus secreting gland. Now we've got these slightly larger structures found in amongst this smooth muscle elastic fibre region. These here, we'll label these up here, these are quite simply small blood vessels. So we'll just put those in there. These are small blood vessels that we find. So there are our key components, there are our key tissues that we're looking at in the lung. We've got this C-shaped cartilage, we've got some smooth muscle, elastic fibres, we've got ciliated epithelial goblet cells and small blood vessels. Now just to be clear, this is a trachea. So this is a cross-section just of the trachea, the tube essentially running from the mouth down towards both of the bronchi, the left and right bronchus. The bronchiole would look notably different in terms of size. Now, both the trachea and bronchi have thick walls with several tissue layers. So that's the first thing to know. I'm just going to make a few bullet points here. That essentially what we're looking at are very thick walls. That's a key point to note. Now, much of the wall consists of this cartilage in the form of an incomplete ring, a C-ring. So we'll just make a note of that up here too, because they're called incomplete C-rings, and you can sort of see that from the shape, and you can feel it if you were to lay your fingers on your own throat and just press slightly, you can feel the sort of outside part of these incomplete C-rings. And they're more prevalent in the trachea. You've got what's called loose tissue, and that's found inside the surface of the cartilage. Now that loose tissue contains the glandular and connective tissue, elastic fibres, smooth muscle and blood vessels. So that whole region essentially is referred to as loose tissue. So it's really, if I were to draw this in black, I'll do this in a black pen. So we're looking at this region from here, draw this with an arrow, to here. So the bulk of the diagram that I've already labelled, that whole area, that represents loose tissue, and that's the name that we give that sort of region. So the area sort of within our incomplete cartilage. So again, it's got glandular connective tissue, elastic fibre, smooth muscle, blood vessels, a whole range of things. Now the inner lining, we've said, comprises of ciliated epithelial cells and goblet cells. Now bronchioles, if we were to look at them, bronchioles are much narrower. So bronchioles are narrow, but they barely have any cartilage. In fact, they're predominantly smooth muscle and elastic fibres. And we know that alveoli are found at the end of the bronchioles. So this picture here, again, I'll just make a note. This is a trachea in a transverse section. And the reason I've shown this is because this is probably the most common diagram you find in textbooks in this particular topic, but clearly there are other kind of structures to consider, and I've just said there that bronchioles, they're much narrower, they don't have so much cartilage, it's a lot more smooth muscle elastic fibres. Now I want to think about the role of these tissues in the lung, and we're going to consider the five key tissues that I've noted on this diagram. Let's start by looking at the cartilage. So we said we've got these incomplete rings that you find within the trachea and bronchi, and they're designed to prevent them from collapse when the air pressure is low. Very similar to the lignin that you find in xylem vessels in the plant, the way they're kind of strengthened and supported to prevent collapse. Very similar to that, and I've done a video on that one. Now the fact that it's an incomplete ring allows for some flexibility to able to move the neck and to allow for expansion during swallowing. So that's the reason why we have this cartilage. Not only does it prevent collapse, but it gives us some flexibility, and it allows the airways to kind of expand a little bit during the swallowing process. That's why we have an incomplete ring. So that's number one. Let's consider key structure number two, and that is the smooth muscle. Now the smooth muscle actually contracts to reduce the diameter of the airway, and that can help to restrict some harmful substances in the air entering into the respiratory system. Now I should say that the action of the smooth muscle is not voluntary. So you've got a little bit of smooth muscle there to help with constriction. Now let's consider the elastic fibres. Now those elastic fibres help to reduce the diameter of the lumen, which is essentially the main hole, the airway, if you like, when that smooth muscle constricts or contracts. Now when the smooth muscle relaxes, the fibres actually return to their original shape and size, and that allows for expansion of the airway. Now in the alveoli, they actually aid expansion whilst preventing bursting. So they're really key, those elastic fibres. They reduce the diameter of the lumen when the smooth muscle contracts, but allow it to expand when they return to their original shape and size. So we've got an element of control there. But in the alveoli, the reason why they're so key is because it allows the alveoli to expand as we're inhaling, but they prevent bursting. So there's a little bit about the elastic fibres. Now we're going to consider the goblet cells and the glandular tissue. So let's put a number 4 here. Now they are key because they are found under the epithelium, and they secrete mucus to trap tiny particles such as pollen or bacteria, and that is designed to reduce the risk of infection. So I have mentioned that earlier, and I said that what you're going to get is this mucus trapping these particles, then the cilia waft in a continuous flow motion to push that mucus to the top of the throat where it's swallowed. It goes down to the stomach essentially, and the stomach acid will kill anything there. Which leaves us with one key tissue to consider, and that is the actual ciliated epithelium itself. And that is essentially tied in with number 4. The two really go hand in hand. So this ciliated epithelium does contain cilia, These are cells with these tiny hairs that are projected from the surface that, as I said, waft this mucus. So we often consider one separately, the cartilage. You talk about the ring itself. 2 and 3 kind of go together in terms of kind of how they work and operate, and 4 and 5 go together. So there we've got our 5 key tissues in the lung that we need to consider: cartilage, smooth muscle, elastic fibres, the goblet cells and glandular tissue, and the ciliated epithelium. Now, you're not necessarily going to be asked to memorise this entire diagram, but it's certainly worth knowing and just being aware of the fact that you have these thick walls, you've got these several tissue layers. It's important to know the name of what we found within the loose tissue, and also just a few differences between the particular regions that we're talking about. So knowing, as I said, that the bronchioles are much narrower with less cartilage and more smooth muscle elastic fibres, that we've got the alveoli at the end of those. All these are really little things that any exam question could pick up on. Okay, so I hope all that helps.